at the end of the last one, I've broken my obligation for this live session into two because of the two topics which I deal with, and it struck me that it would make more sense that you were able to access these kind of discreetly rather than as a single 1 hour unit rather than having to go through half an hour stuff which is irrelevant to your needs at that moment. So the second of the sessions is looking at production roles, because we're about to go into production, well, within the next month or so anyway, okay? And many of you haven't really shared a clear idea of the production role you want to be assessed in. And you can only be assessed in one. So, while it is brilliant that you get to make a film, and most of you, and in fact all of my group are working individually on this, and this is quite laudable, but only one of the roles should be the focus. Well, you should try to make as good a film as you can, but only one of the roles is where the focus of assessment is going to fall. So in that role, you need to be keeping notes about your preparation and your creative process and the negotiation and change of your ideas through shooting, through editing and sound design. And then you need to actually assess the conduct of your role and assess the movie as a whole. Okay? Right, I'm going to do a bit of application sharing in the hope that this will work. So here we go. Because I have a document I would like you to look at. Here we go, preview. And production portfolio criteria. This is, wrong one. Let's close that one down. Here we go. This is from the film guide. Now sharing, okay, thank you very much. So here we go. I'm hoping that everybody can see this. And here we go. Internal assessment criteria. That means that your three teachers will mark your work. I will mark all of the work from my group, and we will moderate our marks by sharing, I think we do 5. It depends on the number of students which we have, but we will tend to take work from each band and to mark each other's work as well, which is called moderation. What it means is that essentially when we send the work off to the IBO for moderation by their examiners, that we are consistent, okay? So there are 5 criterion for the production portfolio, and those of you who were in my Year 1 class should know this, because the later production assignments, I applied all of those criteria. So I'm just going to do a quick reminder. So there's planning and research, reflection and evaluation, professional and technical skills, the effective use of film language, and originality and creativity. And the IBO have very, very kindly set out a table below there, which I'm going to bring up to, Mac appears to be misbehaving. That's not good. Okay. Right, I've got to start the application sharing again. My apologies for that, but the Mac was misbehaving. Excuse me one moment. Part of the problem is I've just installed a beta of their latest software, which is probably less than wise, to be frank. But there you go. So here we go. I'm hoping you can see that again. So, criterion A and criterion C are just based on your documentation. Criterion B is also based on your documentation. Criterion E is based on your documentation and your production. You'll see it on the documentation and production as well. Only criterion D, which is effective use of film language, is based on your production. So, great that you're making a film, better that you keep an accurate journal and that your reflections are sophisticated and that you prepare properly for your role and demonstrate your understanding of that production role in your reflections. Making a terrific film and providing a 10th rate commentary is not going to get you a great grade, I'm afraid. So, how are you going to do this? Well, we need to think about what the 5 roles are, and they're probably listed here somewhere. Let's just have a quick look. I haven't got them here, so I'm going to tell you what they are. Okay, the first, well, there isn't first and last, but you have screenwriter, you have director, you have cinematographer, you have film editor or video editor, and you have sound designer and sound editor. Okay, that's the 5. So you need to determine which of those you wish to pursue, and you need to document your research and planning accordingly. The more detail, the better. And I'm not saying, well, actually, what I am saying is you document it now. You don't save everything up until the last minute and then write a commentary which is based on fiction. You document everything now because you actually have to produce evidence of each of these things in your commentary as appendices to support what you say. Okay? So you need to keep your journal right now. So let's have a look at the first one, script writing. Not something which I do a lot of, I must admit, but this is really a case of do as I say rather than I do, I think. So, as a script writer, you're going to be responsible for the story, you're going to be responsible for understanding the story structure, and I think when I've spoken to everybody in my group, I've asked everybody to set their story into the 3-act structure in detail, because what that then permits is for you to determine what the starting point and what the ending point of your 5-minute short will be. So you can determine which elements are inferred, which elements are explicitly revealed within the film. So if you remember that stuff about story and plot that we did way back when, okay? So use that in Fabulous, I think it's called, the kind of Russian names of it. However, so you can actually determine what's going to be included in the plot, what's actually going to be inferred, and you can also determine the sequencing of the plot. So stage 1 is your kind of story idea. Stage 2 is setting the whole story down from the very first incident through to the very last incident of your story. That's not necessarily what's going to be in your film, but that's the story, and then placing that within the 3-act structure. I have to say, I don't think that the hero's journey certainly works. Well, I don't believe that it works as a whole for a short, but you might take phases of it for a short. So you could possibly use the hero's journey and explore distinct phases of the hero's journey, perhaps to try and subvert it, or to actually raise questions about it. That might be quite interesting. But anyway, you have to write your story down, and then you have to kind of map it out using the 3-act structure. And at that stage, you need to think about sequencing. And then you'll be required to do a treatment. how it will work in film. Okay? I've shared plenty of URLs with you about writing treatments. I'm no expert on that, so I'm kind of reluctant to offer advice on it. But you should look at the various sources and think about how your film is going to work, how your story is going to work in film. Okay? I would also say that you have to show the development of the screenplay through a series of at least 3 or 4 drafts, and you should include your drafts. What you must remember about screenplay is that only about 25% of your screenplay will be dialogue. And it's quite likely that in your drafting process you'll be cutting it down, because your whole story would probably be about a short feature then. But you have 5 minutes to play with, no more. Absolutely no more. If you have more than 5 minutes, some of the criteria, I think the planning and research will be grade capped. Okay, we had a student who had that problem last year. It didn't really matter to her, but she had to be grade capped with professional and technical skills and planning and research, which is a real shame because she made a great film. But it did not meet the criteria. Okay, so I would suggest also that the final part of your role as the screenwriter is storyboarding. Just setting out how each sequence fits together. Okay? Although that's something you ought to share with the director, because it's the visualization. So, moving right along to the director. We begin with the visualization of the screenplay. So that is storyboarding, which should include some reference to, well, obviously to framing, to shot composition. It should also include some reference to the blocking of the camera angles. The second thing that you have to do is floor planning. Well, actually, there's plenty for you to do, because you have to do the location scouting and the casting as well. Because I guess you're going to be first assistant as well as director, so you have to do both roles. So location scouting, which means you produce stills of the locations you're going to use to shoot, and you produce floor plans, bird's eye views of them. We've talked about this before. Nobody ever really did it satisfactorily during year one. And if you're going to be director, you're going to have to do it satisfactorily, because the floor planning is going to help your blocking. Because the floor planning will be where you set the camera, how the camera will move, how the characters will move, where and when lines of dialogue are delivered, cue points, where the camera will cut and move to another place. You need to make decisions about whether you shoot a master shot and then shoot breakdown shots. Okay? You understand this? You need to think very carefully about projecting how you see it as being edited. Is it going to be shot in continuity, or are you going to do something a little different? If you're going to do something a little different, how are you going to pull it off? So you need to think very carefully about that, and you need to plan it. You need to plan it to the closest of detail. So storyboarding to visualize it, work with the screenplay person, which actually will be you as well. And location scouting, casting. When you're casting, cast understudies as well. Because so many student films fail, particularly, or if you're going to cast people in year one film. Don't cast people in the same year as yourself, because they're doing the IB as well. They're not going to have time. Okay? Just cast people that you know can be reliable, who don't have the same kind of ridiculous commitments that you do in year two. Okay? So, locations, floor plans, blocking. Once you've done your blocking, you need to annotate the storyboards, but you need to give blank copies of the storyboards to the editor and to the cinematographer as well. It may well be that you can bring somebody else in to do the cinematography if you're not going to be assessed in that role, but you need to show as director that you've given them clear instructions, because you can't blame somebody's poor cinematography if you're director, if your movie is a turkey, because you're responsible for it. Okay. Excuse my dogs. So I'm going to move along to cinematographer and think about some of the planning for that. Now, cinematographer is probably the most technical, and it's the one where it's pretty much equipment-led, okay? So a cinematographer, obviously you're in discussion with the director, with, I guess, the screenwriter, because of the visualized version of it and the blocking. So you need to actually figure out that the blocking works with the storyboard. Does that make sense? So what you actually have to do is have copies of the floor plans, and you have to have copies of the storyboard, and these have to be annotated for your role, whether something works or not, and what the impact of it will be. Other stuff as cinematographer is that actually you need to build the detail into it, because as cinematographer you're responsible for setting the camera. So there are certain things that you need to know how to do. Things like white balance. So the classic is to staple a white t-shirt over a board and actually take a shot of the white t-shirt once you set your white balance for each different shot and ensure that it's the same. Because the white balance setting, if you set it to auto, it will be different in every shot. So you actually need to do that manually. These are things you need to make notes of at the planning stage. So you need to actually look at the locations and think about how the white balances work. You need to also think about the aperture which you're going to use on the camera, and you need to think about the ISO setting. Now the ISO setting on a digital camera is broadly similar to the film stock that you would use in an analog camera. So you need to be very clear. I think the higher the ISO setting is in your camera, the more grainy the film will be. So is that what you want? So those are decisions which you as cinematographer need to make. You also need to think about how the camera is going to move. You need to think about framing in consultation with your director, and you also need to anticipate the needs of the editor. Okay? So take 2 takes of everything, multiple cutaways, multiple insert shots for where the sound drops out. Okay? So that sound can be inserted later if there's a problem with the take. So as cinematographer, you're the person who's actually going to capture the kind of creative work of the director and the screenwriter. So you've got a huge responsibility, and you have to actually make sure it works. So it has to be well planned. You have to understand your equipment. You have to make positive decisions about the way it's going to be shot. Nothing should be left on auto on your camera. Absolutely not, because it will look awful. Okay? It needs to be set to manual. You need to understand how the manual settings work. If you don't already, and you're going to be cinematographer, get practicing. Okay? Do some test shots, and you can include that in your planning and research, because it is research. Okay? So you can do the test shots at the locations. Right? So, what you must also do is anticipate the needs of the editor. So, you need to ensure things like continuity. You need to ensure that you don't cross the 180-degree line. You need to ensure that you have enough material. 2 takes of everything, at least 2 takes of everything. Your clips need to be logged. You need to actually call the shots and use a clapperboard, just using your hands like that. Have somebody call the shot and clap their hands, and that will actually sync the sound to the image. Excuse me. Right. So that's kind of a really exciting job. Got a chance doing it. Finally, you have to ensure that you anticipate things going wrong, where sound drops out, when you have a take where somebody fluffs their lines or something like that. If you have a cutaway or something you can insert, the lines can be re-recorded without upsetting the take. If you're going to do a master shot, breakdown shot, you should have enough footage. Okay, but that's the director's decision. Okay, so moving right along to the editor. The editor will be in consultation with both the director and the screenwriter, and they should have sufficient footage to put together the visualization. The sequencing of the story is probably to be sorted out by the screenwriter with the director. Okay. The cinematographer will have provided enough footage. First things first, an editor has to log the clips. You have to have something similar to call sheets. So you have scene 1, take 1, and each of those takes needs to be assessed for its qualities and its flaws. So, scene 1, take 1, for example, lighting good, white balance, less than 100%, lines fluffed. And then you do the same, scene 1, take 2, and then you make an assessment of each of those. So that this actually cuts down your work when you put the assembly cut together. So that you know before you actually begin the assembly cut, which takes are going to work. The editor will also have a copy of the storyboard which they can annotate. And the annotations should include the duration of takes. Okay? And at first, the duration of the take needs to be done according to the requirements of the director, but it might not end up that way, because editing is a kind of musical thing, as Walter Marsh said. So it might be that the rhythms of the film require editing of takes to be done in different ways, or takes to be broken up with inserts. It might be that just simple pragmatic considerations require that as well. But only by logging the clips can you determine what course of action you're going to take. So this is planning and research. You also need to think about the style of editing you're going to do, and you need to think about the way that your shots will fit together. What kind of way do you want the audience to engage with this material? For example, do you want the audience to be disturbed or shocked, in which case you pretty much put a kind of clashing montage sequence together, which relates in, well, I don't know, it's for you to figure out, it's not for me to tell you. But you need to think about the style of editing, and you may well need to do a bit of research in order to do that, looking at other films. And of course, you would look at, well, you have plenty of material. I don't need to tell you what to look at. Your third cut will be the assembly cut, which is essentially that which was determined by the director. It's all the clips in the right order, and they will include the calls, the shot calling, and the clapperboard. From there you go to the first rough cut, and then you go through a series of revisions, and at each stage you need to be showing your reflections of what works, what doesn't work, why is it being revised. You need to justify your decision making. As you can see on the screen, evaluation in the individual written commentary. That's what you do. You're assessing and you're evaluating. You're showing planning and research, professional and technical skills. Okay? You'll also, in the end, hopefully be showing effective use of film language. I'm glad to see your job is a tricky one because you need to also be working as a sound designer, if that's not you. And that takes me to the last of the 5 roles, because I'm aware I'm going on a bit. The last of the 5 roles is sound designer, and you have a role through production and post-production. As a sound designer, you need to be considering where microphones go on set, and you need to be on set. You should not just use the microphone on the camera. It won't be good enough. Most digital SLRs have shoes for microphones. So beg, steal, borrow, get your hands on the mic. If you can't actually get the mic to plug into the camera, record to a separate source. One of the things I used to do when I talk face-to-face was I used to have mini-disc recorders, and we had a mixer, and a mini-disc recorder I think would record 4 tracks or something like that. And we had something pretty sophisticated kit, so we could play it back in 4 tracks and mix it down into a computer. But these days, I think with a Mac you can set up 3 or 4 tracks to record. But beg, steal, borrow what equipment you can. If you are going to record to a separate source and then marry the stuff together later, it's absolutely vital that somebody calls the shot and does the clapperboard thing, which I described earlier. Because that is the only way you're going to be able to sync the sound to each sequence. Can you imagine a film with 30 or 40 takes fitted together? How much work it would be to try and resync that if you didn't have a clapperboard? So, at the point where you get the assembly cut, you as a sound designer should know which on-set sounds will be included in the film. And at that point, you will need to actually match those on-set sounds to the assembly cut for the editor to cut down. They should be left obviously in separate tracks in the edit suite, so that later, because your responsibility will be to make the sound mix. So obviously, your prep begins with the locations of microphones on the set. Okay? So firstly, on-set sounds. Your second task is a post-production task. Any Foley which needs to be done. Now you should remember what Foley is. I'm not discussing to you, year 2 film students, you should know this. You need to actually make notes about what Foley is required. And it may well be that in discussion with the director and screenwriter, you will get a notion of that early on. And you will need to be quite inventive about that, but you will also need to keep annotations about your reflections on this. My dog's sing at 7 o'clock with the parents, and that's what we're doing right now, because they're not in pain. So, we're talking about Foley, we're talking about on-screen sets, we're talking about matching the material that you record to the footage that you do at the assembly stage. Once the editor produces tighter and tighter and more refined cuts, you will also need to match what happens with that. But you also need to actually reflect upon how the sound will be mixed. Because if you have, say, 4 tracks of on-set sound and 2 tracks of Foley and some other electronic effects, you need to actually consider how these are mixed in such a way to communicate the intentions of the screenwriter and director. Okay? Because sound is an important issue in film as well, as you clearly understand. Finally, you need to record room tone, because sound will drop out, so that you need to have a track where there's just room tone, where it's just a consistent background noise. So you might need just half an hour of a microphone on in the room, okay, which you can edit. Right, well, I've been going on for a little while now. I hope I've probably forgotten things, but my colleagues will probably cover all the bases for you and answer any questions for you. I'm here to answer questions through the usual channels from my group. The other two tutors will also be able to answer your questions about the various production roles. It's quite important that you establish what your production role is before you go into production, so that you can do the proper research and planning, criterion ADOs. Okay? I'm going to finish this up now. I'm hoping this is recorded. I think it did.